Today on Blue Values TV, find out about air pollution. What is the impact of air pollution and what are we doing about it right here in Placer County? Stay tuned. Welcome to Blue Values TV. I'm your host, Jack Uppel. On today's show, we're going to talk about air pollution and what's being done about it right here in Placer County and in the Sacramento region. Blue Values TV is a production of the Blue Values Coalition. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to informing, educating, and engaging our neighbors in the governance of our communities. Look for us online at www.bluevaluescoalition.org. Our guest today is Ms. Kori Titus, the CEO of Breathe California in Sacramento. Welcome, Kori.
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you here. So we want to talk a little bit today about Breathe California. What is it? What is the history of it? Where did it come from? And what are you guys doing? Can you educate us on that, please?
I certainly can. Well, Breathe California has actually been in the Sacramento region since 1917. So we have a very long, rich history. We're one of the oldest voluntary health organizations in the region. And we are a regional organization. So we are Breathe California of Sacramento Immigrant Trails is actually our name. And there's a history there because we actually had we have a lot of history in Placer County, and we merged with a couple of organizations. So we started really because we were trying to get rid of tuberculosis. And in fact, if you go up 80 and off Weimar, that's where our TB camps were, because in those days, that's how you dealt with tuberculosis. You sent children.
Segregated people out
Well,
there.
you sent them to the either to the desert or to the mountains through the clean air and the dry air, because that was one of the best ways at that point that they knew to treat it. So we spent a lot of time up this way in those days. So spent many, many years battling tuberculosis. It was the primary health issue for really the world at the time. And as just about the time we were kind of getting all of that under control, unfortunately we do have a TB problem, but it's nothing like what we had then. Is about the same time, ironically, that the first Surgeon General's report on tobacco and the health hazards of smoking tobacco came out. And
that would have been in the 1960s?
Late 60s, yeah. We just had the 50th anniversary of the first tobacco, Surgeon General's report on tobacco. We just celebrated that this spring, so, or late winter, I guess. So it was about that same time, right thereafter, that the Clean Air Act was introduced. So there's really very critical key things happening around us that really were the new impacts on lung health, because that's what we've always been interested in. So at that point in time, we'd always been very much about prevention and advocacy, certainly with tuberculosis, looking for a cure, but always about prevention and education. So it fit real nicely for us as we continue to look at what were the biggest health impacts to our lungs. And certainly air quality in the late 60s and early 70s was a very big issue, as was smoking, and unfortunately both still remain today. So so we moved away from being the Tuberculosis Society as we took on this larger mission. We were the American Lung Association in Sacramento, again, of Sacramento Immigrant Trails, because there was an Immigrant Trails organization we merged.
American Lung Association is pretty widely known to a lot of people.
Correct.
So this is the same American Lung Association that later on became the organization you're with.
We are still the same people. About 6 years ago, we actually split off from the National Lung Association. They were looking to reorganize and had a very different business model. And when we looked at it, it was very critical to us to stay true to our local. We're talking about air quality today. It's a great example. Our air quality problems are so much different than, say, Arizona or even Pittsburgh or, you know, any of these areas around the country. We can't tackle them the same way. They're very different. They have different outcomes. They have different solutions. And so we've always been a grassroots community organization, and so it was imperative that we stayed that way and that we continue to focus on the very specific needs of our community. So, so we lost a lot of family in many ways. We had all worked together for a long time and lost the name, but we never lost our mission and never lost our passion. So I always like to say, same people, same mission, just a different name.
Ah, okay. Now tell me, what is unique about Sacramento region? And how do we stack up in terms of air pollution as compared to the rest of the state and the rest of the country?
Unfortunately, that news is not good. Sacramento, our air basin, which, again, air basins are not county specific. Our air basin has all of Sacramento County, a good portion of Placer County, some of El Dorado, Yolo Solano, and Feather River. So we have this very large, unique basin, but it
and
really,
by basin, you really mean basin, where a valley
we mean the bowl.
Yeah.
Again, we don't go as far south because they are separated there, so it's not like the large Central Valley, but yeah, it is. And the geography plays such an important part in our air quality. So unfortunately, the Sacramento region consistently ranks in the top 10 worst air quality in the country.
Really?
Yeah, which, people think, oh, well, you're going to have, Pittsburgh, or, somebody with coal mines and steels. Well, Los Angeles is in there too. In fact, in the top 10, I think 6 of them are usually, because it's Redding, it's us, it's Bakersfield, it's Los Angeles. So again, right up that big valley, that same thing we're talking about.
Right there.
We're all in that same dirty dozen or less.
The effect of the pollution. Let's talk about that a little bit. It's not just the fact that, hey, okay, so our air is a little unhealthy, we've got ozone. What's the impact of that? What do we see in terms of health issues and lives being lost due to air pollution?
Unfortunately, it can be astronomical. In fact, there's been studies that have been done that have shown as many as 6, 7 times as many people die from what comes out of a tailpipe than being in a car crash, which some people think that's so hazardous. And in fact, because of the pollution that we see, we're seeing more premature deaths. And so in California, because we are a very large state, obviously, with a lot of transportation, we bear a very big burden. And again, because we have so many of those top 10 in our state, we carry a very large health burden. You see things like, people think automatically, well, you're breathing, it's your lungs, but it's not just your lungs, it's your entire cardiovascular system. In fact, we did some research where we correlated ischemic heart disease to particulate matter levels, and we found that in those high locations, you were 16 times more likely to die from ischemic heart disease. I mean, those are astronomical numbers when you look at it. So obviously there's those big, premature death. We're shortening our lives.
How do you define premature death?
They look at what your expected life expectancy is for your age, gender, when you're born and where you're living, and then it's whatever has been reduced from that. So it's lives beyond shortened of what they would have expected for you in your
so we've got
particular instance.
Premature deaths. We've got cases of asthma.
Well, and there's a couple things that happen with asthma. So certainly people who already have impaired respiratory systems. So certainly it's kind of on both ends of the spectrum. You have our very young people and you have our elderly. So with our elderly, and particularly folks who have COPD, so anybody who already has some kind of respiratory issue, they're going to be adversely impacted by our poor air quality. They're going to have things like shortened breath, wheezing, coughing, all of those kinds of things. On the other end of the spectrum is our littlest ones, and the ones that probably have an even greater impact because their young lungs are still growing and they're being exposed to harmful pollutants. So unfortunately, in all of those same areas that we've talked about that have high pollution levels, they also have extremely high rates of asthma. And what we're seeing is not only is air pollution a trigger for somebody who's already been diagnosed with asthma, but some of the research, the Children's Health Research study that happened out of USC a number of years ago, they saw that children who are living in areas with high ozone pollution and certain genetic makeups in particular, not only was it a trigger, it was a cause of asthma. That these children who didn't have asthma in their families, they didn't have other genetic predispositions, were actually developing asthma. And the frightening part is that they tracked these children over a long period of time, and they saw that even when children moved out of high ozone populated areas, the lung damage was done and it wasn't repaired. So it wasn't like, well, I can just go move to a cleaner spot and my lungs are going to come back. They didn't see that. So we're talking about, you know, this is damage that's been done to their lungs that they're going to live with for the rest of their lives. So, so it's much more serious than just, oh, I might cough a little bit, or my eyes are, you know, I don't have a respiratory disease. I don't, you know, but I certainly, yes, I get, it's hard to breathe sometimes, and I certainly get the burny eyes, especially on some of those bad days and some bad particulate matter days as well. But for those who already have an impairment, you're going to have more emergency room visits, you're going to have more missed work days, you're going to have, you know, more use of your inhaler, your rescue medications, if you're an asthmatic or somebody with COPD. There's so many health outcomes that come with it, and unfortunately more incidents of heart disease and fatal heart attacks that we're going to see because on those high days.
Yeah, certainly people who have personal experience with loved ones that have asthma understand the severity of how serious that disease is. Now, Breathe California and California, Sacramento region, has made progress in controlling some of our pollutants, ozone levels and carbon emissions and so on. We have seen the decline and improvement.
We've seen excellent decline and improvement. We've all worked very, very hard. I think the biggest problem is that low-hanging fruit has been picked.
Well, tell me, first of all, what were some of the improvements that we made? What did we do that actually resulted in some of the improvements?
Well, we've seen lots more controls on the industries that we don't have a lot, but we do have few. And so we've had great compliance and cooperation with our industries that are high polluters. We've seen great instances in technology. We've done things like we have the Moyer program, which provides grant money for large trucking or small trucking companies, but for large diesel engines to be traded out to get into the cleaner technologies. So technology has been a huge driver of some of our improvements. We have better transit, we have better options for people, we have different kinds of housing options for folks so that you don't have to live 30 miles away from where you work if you don't want to. It's a wide variety of things. It's not a single answer, again, because our pollution, so much of it is about personal choice. So it's the cars we drive, not only the type, but how often and how we drive them, and our life patterns, and are we combining trips, are we taking a transit or a bicycle if we can. It's a really complicated problem and solution, but we are in much better shape than we were. However, we are still what the EPA considers a non-attainment area, and that means that we are living in unhealthy conditions. Granted, as we've had more research come out and we've learned more about the harmful impacts of pollution, the levels we've had to achieve have continued to go up because we need the air to be healthier. So yes, we've made great improvements, and by old standards, we would probably be in attainment. But the problem is we now know that's not healthy enough. We're still not there. But there's good news. For instance, it looks like you have to have an attainment plan, and we'll have to continue it, but we are now in attainment for one of our PM goals, which is great. It's the first one we've made for a while. We have particulate matter, yes.
We've got two different types, if you will, of particulate matter, and they're categorized really by the size. And the effect that they have in the human body is a little bit different based on the size. Let's talk about that a little bit. The two categories, how would you define them, and what are we doing to control the particulates of different size?
Well, there's actually more than two types,
okay,
but there are two types that are regulated right now. And so you're talking about your coarse and your fine particulates, your PM10 and your PM2.5s. But there's actually a third type even below that that is not regulated right now, but is really on the cusp and everybody's looking at, we're all concerned about, and that's your ultrafine particulates that are even smaller.
How small would those? So
0.025, smaller than the tip of a hair. So your body, your lungs are designed to filter out some of the bigger stuff. You know, if you are, I'm trying to think, if you were at a campfire and you see the big pieces of that stuff, not a problem. Your body can filter that out.
Yeah, we've evolved to be able to deal with
Correct,
that stuff.
correct. It's when you get into those very, very small particulate matter that's really where our concern is, and those are the things that are created by, quite frankly, combustion. It's engines that are creating these things, and what we're seeing with even the ultrafine particulates, those can actually get into your lungs because your body isn't designed to filter those out, so they get in quite easily, unfortunately. And they can lodge in your lungs. And what we see with the ultrafine particulates is that it's doing more than that. It's actually crossing the lungs and into the bloodstream. So now we're seeing impacts that could be not just on our lungs and our cardiovascular system, but we're actually seeing that it could be impacting brain function, and so there's some research out there that's just starting to evolve. So that's something we're watching very, very closely. And the way that pollution moves is very different. With most particulate matter, you'll see where it lofts from where it came from, and then it'll drop off quite dramatically. Where with ultrafines, we're actually seeing it perform much more like a gas, like ozone. Yeah. And so we're seeing things much farther away from their source than you would the larger particulates, because those tend to just drop off.
So I guess the way I would think of it is that the larger particle sizes, we've got defenses for within our own bodies. We grew up with that, we've evolved with that, so we're pretty well protected from the larger particle sizes. The smaller ones are coming mainly from other man-made activities such as combustion of organics and so on. We're not evolved to handle those, and those have serious impacts. Correct. Now, that's one of the things that led the EPA to basically make a decision that fine dust, dust particles that are very, very small, that aren't just dust, but they also come from other sources, are dangerous. They're pollutants, and they need to be regulated. Now, critics of the EPA had a major problem that here we are regulating dust, and it sounds like we're doing something that's really kind of unnecessary because, hey, we're all used to dust, but this isn't really dust, is it?
No, and all dust is not created equal,
all
quite
dust
frankly.
Is not created equal.
Well, and you have a couple things. For a great example is an issue that I know areas of Placer County have, as well as Sacramento County, and that's asbestos. Yeah. The natural occurring asbestos. That is not just dust. When you grind that up, that is nowhere near the dirt that most of us would have in their garden. That's what I think of as dust. The other problem is dust, if it's from the roadway. What happens is that dust can be metals that have come from your brake pads or your engine or oil, and all of that gets reanimated when it's dry and it drives through, and so what you're calling dust is not really dust. There's a lot of harmful compounds there. There's also dust that could have been because it's from agriculture and that there's pesticides involved. So dust is not just dust. There are things that can be combined to it. It's the kind of dust, it's the source of the dust, and unfortunately our body cannot handle those things, and especially it's that fine dust again. We're not talking about you're driving down a dirt road and you see the big dust. That's not what we're talking about here.
Right.
This is very specialized kinds of dust, and unfortunately very toxic kinds of dust.
So you point out something, that the sources and the solutions to air pollution are multifaceted. So you talked about doing things to control how we drive and so on, and transportation, but it also deals with how we set up communities and how much urban sprawl we have, and how and that impacts how much people have to drive. You've gotten different plans, and you've worked with the Sacramento County governance committees.
Council of Governments.
Council of Governments, that's what I'm thinking of. You work with SACOG on plans for how to set up communities. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. This was a major effort. Wow, it's been almost 10 years now. Where does time go? It was called Blueprint, and it was a region-wide process that was has become quite the model for everybody in California, the country, and even the world. A lot of people look at the process that we did, and we were involved because we were trying to get community members engaged, because this was a community process. And what we did is we actually went into every single community and did workshops, and communities members were able to look at we started at the city level, and this is your community and here's what it looks like right now, but we expect that you're going to have, based on population projections, you're going to have this many more people. Where are you going to put them?
Right.
And we let community members say, well, you know, this is an area right now where we have a lot of business focused. So maybe this might be a place where we could do some multi-use, or this is an area that's been tagged for development and it really is going to be single family housing, so we're going to leave that there. But here's where we might have, there's a hospital here right now, so that would be a really great place to put more dense senior living. And so communities were able to actually take the building blocks and figure out how many people that represented and design their communities. And then that was taken and that was all fed into the next level, which was the county level. And so we started looking at, okay, how does this equation fit in? And we wanted to make sure there was work-life balance, so that people didn't have to drive to downtown Sacramento from Roseville, that there were employment opportunities in each of these areas. Because as soon as you start doing that, or you know, you have a grocery store within walking distance or biking distance, I don't have to take my car to do that anymore. Or, you know, maybe you can, really the industry you're in, that's the only place you can go, but maybe there are other kinds of work-life trade-offs, like you could telecommute. So we really started looking at all kinds of different things, and finally and this was a multi-year process, at the end we had a regional town hall, and there were different scenarios that were developed.
Right.
Personally, I would have liked the even more aggressive scenario, but as a region, we landed on kind of the middle scenario, which was, and again, this was just all of us saying we want to work together. There's nothing that's, unfortunately, I wish there was something to hold people's feet to the hot fire to make sure that you're following it, but there's not. But they are great guidelines, and we have had an awful lot of compliance with that scenario that we all adopted, that said this is the kind of community and region we want to live in, because it wasn't just about air quality, but certainly air quality is the driver, because I don't think people understand that if we don't meet our air quality goals, there are major ramifications, and not just the health impacts, which obviously are what I'm talking about, but our transit dollars could be delayed or withheld. So our roads are in pretty bad condition. We need more transit. Those are all things we need. Can you imagine if our transportation dollars from the federal government were not sent our way? If we don't meet our goals, that's what could happen.
And it impacts not just roads, but also public transit.
That's exactly, everything.
The criticism that I heard from this blueprint was basically this is some kind of an agenda by the far left or something to force us all into high-density housing, force us to bicycle to work, and so on. How would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, it was not. In fact, I kind of I'm snickering because I think the SACOG board is pretty not liberal. It's quite the opposite, and it was a community kind of. Like I said, we started in every single city, and it was community members telling us, what do we want our communities to look like? So I don't think there's an agenda in that sense. And in fact, if you look at the blueprint scenarios that we finally adopted as a region, there's room for all of those things. There's still lots of open space. There's lots of very large lot homes. There's lots of medium and small lot homes, as well as, yes, there's lots more loft living. I mean, things that we didn't have 10 years ago. I do work in downtown Sacramento, and it's so much fun to see how revitalized it is. It's becoming, I lived in San Francisco for many, many years. It's becoming more like San Francisco. There's options for people. You know, I personally live on a large lot home. I'll admit that. And I do commute to Sacramento. Because it's okay. There's options for everybody, but there's a lot of people. And what's interesting is that we saw the market is driving it. The market is demanding these things. I have so many young people that work for me. They don't want the house that I live in. They want something that's closer, that's smaller. They don't want to spend their money on housing and their time maintaining it.
Right.
You know, they have lots of other interests, so it's a very different generation that's coming up.
So you're not going to herd us all into high-density housing? And
only if you want to go there.
Just wanted to be sure.
No. There's lots of, in fact, and as we're seeing development come back online now, that we're seeing some improvements in our economy, we're seeing all those kinds of developments come back online. We're seeing every single type of housing out there. So, and I think that's what it's about. It's about choice. Where, 15, 20 years ago, well, more than that now, I moved back to the region after having been gone for a while, and there wasn't a lot of choice.
Yeah.
But now there really is, and how exciting is that? I think about my daughter coming up, and what she'd want to live in is something very different than what we're living in now. So I think that's really important, so that we can have a rich, vibrant community. We have to have all those choices.
Yeah. Now, Breathe California is a nonprofit 501c3 organization with tax-exempt donations. Can you talk a little bit about how you're funded and what viewers can do to help your cause?
Great. We are, as you said, we've been a 501c3, a nonprofit since the beginning of our existence, and we have a number of different sources. Certainly, we work with our local air districts, so they fund programs, lots of education and advocacy. We really focus a lot on children. It's much easier to create good behaviors than fix our bad ones. And they're eager, and they eat it up, and they're ready to change the world. It's quite wonderful. And so we work with children all the way from really preschool aged on some of our asthma programs all the way through high school and college students, really focusing a lot of our programs there. So certainly our local air districts are partners in that. We have funding from foundations and other state grantees for some of our tobacco education work. But a good portion of what we operate on every single day is donations, and again, multifaceted there. We have general donations. We do a number of different fundraising events. We have direct mail. We have planned giving, all of the normal things that every nonprofit out there does. So there's lots of ways for folks to get involved. Not just, obviously, donations are always welcome, but we really welcome your talents and your interests and your passion to come work with us. We have lots of things happening in the community and lots of ways to engage. Even, and you don't have to be an expert. I'm a great example. I am not a scientist. But again, there's lots of things that everybody can do to help get the message out, because that's the biggest thing, especially when it comes to air quality, which is the one of our three areas we're really talking about today. It's going to be about personal action, because 70% of our pollution is from the choices we make every single day. So, if you can pay attention to those spare the air days and not drive, and, maybe you have an employer that you can telecommute those days, or you have transit is available to you and you can take transit, or even better, you can ride a bike or take a walk, good for your lungs, and not only are you not polluting, it's helping your lung health. If we all can make those choices, it really will make a huge difference. And unfortunately, it's the only way it's going to make a difference, because we don't have an oil refinery that's spewing that if we just can control that, that'll take care of our problems. It's personal action. So it's, as small as, when we go out and we work with kids, it's like, turning off the lights makes a difference, because that's energy we don't have to create. That's pollution that's not going in the air. Little tiny actions that even, yes, a 6-year-old can do.
That's right.
So I know that we all can do it, make even bigger actions.
And for more information, viewers can go to your website.
Please, it's www.sacbreathe, that's SACBREATHE.org, or they're welcome to give us a call, 916-444-5900, and would love to get folks involved, get more information, however they want to participate, because it's going to take all of us.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for being with us on our show today.
Okay.
And thank you all to our viewers. It's been great having you with us on Blue Values TV, and until next time, good evening.